The Major League Rugby Dispersal Draft is this week, and of course, it's going to have a big impact on fantasy rugby. We break it all down and tell you what it means for fantasy MLR. The Fantasy Ruckers show starts right now.
Where rugby and the world of fantasy sports collide. Welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, talking all things rugby from the MLR to leagues around the world. We're on top of it. Headphones on, pads off. This is the Fantasy Ruckers show. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Yee, Matt Yee, and Devin Vanderpool.
What's up, everybody? This is episode number 43 of the Fantasy Ruckers show. Thank you so much to our Fantasy Ruckers League members, our Fantasy Ruckers community members, and everyone else tagging along on this journey of trying to make fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR. This is a week we're missing the big boy. It's a big week, but we're missing Vandy, but Matt Yee is with me as always. Man, I feel like we've had a busy weekend in the rugby world. It might not have been necessarily too Major League Rugby related. You might beg to differ. I think you got a little points on that, but we've had a busy weekend in the rugby world. Talk about, autumn test series. We got New Zealand All Blacks, Wales taking on each other. We got the Canadian woman playing in the World Cup semifinals against England. And then we also obviously had the Rugby World Cup qualifiers in Dubai, USA taking on Kenya. That was an exciting one as well. Man, talk about a good time for rugby. And we don't even have the MLR going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's only going to continue to get bigger weekends, more autumn international tests, more repechage tournaments. The stakes are going to be higher every game that goes on in that tournament. And next week we got a New Zealand England final in the Rugby World Cup. So, next weekend's or this upcoming weekend is going to be a big one. But hey, I first want to point out, Ryan, over there, you're looking quite spiffy over there. You're a little dapper, spiffy for the great, occasion of what they call the dispersal draft.
Yeah, exactly. Getting dressed up. I mean, it's a big day. We got a lot to talk about, lots of news to catch up on. We got a brand new team in the MLR apparently, and then yes, Matt, we do have a dispersal draft coming up. So I thought I'd dress up a little bit for the occasion with some of this big news that we got to talk about.
And
but
I mean, hey, the audacity of Van. He didn't even dress up today. He didn't even
show up.
Yeah, he probably doesn't even have clothes on right now.
True.
He probably has his birthday suit on. hanging out. He's not even here. probably getting some insider information. Who knows?
Apparently.
He probably already knows who Utah has, who Utah's already chosen. Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, exactly? Who has an idea of what that guy's going up to? But at the very least, we can say that he's probably got a little bit of fantasy rugby on his mind with this dispersal draft coming up. And we are going to break it all down this episode. You heard it at the top of the show. That's what this episode is all about. We're taking this dispersal draft that is happening on November 11th and breaking it down and trying to figure out what this means for fantasy rugby before it happens. As you're waiting for these results for this dispersal draft to come out, we're going to give you kind of those things to look out for when you're trying to jot out those guys that are on your list to draft some guys. Maybe there's something that changes here when it comes to the dispersal draft, but we're going to break that down later in this episode.
And hey, look, we might have done this in past episodes, but this episode, we're not getting into the politics. We're not getting into the nitty gritty. We're the show that talks about the fantasy impact, the fantasy rugby impact, and how this is going to impact, maybe your potential team that you're managing when the season starts. So that's the look that we're going at it. Can't find it anywhere else but right here.
Right here on the Fantasy Ruckers show. That is exactly right. Couldn't have said it better myself, Maddie. And hey, for anyone listening who isn't already, if you like this type of content, if you're enjoying fantasy rugby, if you're enjoying the journey of trying to make it a reality in the MLR, hey, why don't you give us a follow on the Fantasy Ruckers on our social media pages, at Fantasy Ruckers on Twitter, at The Fantasy Ruckers on Instagram, Facebook. Yeah, just above there on the video if you're watching on YouTube. We're the Fantasy Ruckers on YouTube as well. If you throw us a like, a subscribe down there too, that always helps us out to help grow this thing and get it to more people. That's what we're trying to do. And if that isn't enough for you, you can always join our Discord community as well. The link is down below in the description, in both wherever you're listening on your podcast or in the YouTube description. The link to join our Discord community channel is there. I'm having a lot of cool conversations with a lot of people in the rugby community. The MLR Stats Man is in there. Rugby Morning is in there. You can talk with all of them, and it's right there on our Discord channel. Hey, I'm surprised why more people haven't joined already, but hey, we're trying to grow this thing.
And there's only one place where you're going to see me make ridiculous comments like I did last episode, right? You're going to look at the YouTube. You're going to look at the Discord. Discord, I'm typing them out. I'm a little keyboard warrior in there. On the YouTube, I'm saying it out loud and making myself look silly. And you can comment, tell me just how ridiculous I am. I want to know.
Exactly. And it's also going to be the place that you're going to hear first. Right now, we had our one inaugural league last year that was opened up to 8 lucky members that were able to experience fantasy rugby in the MLR for the first time. But if we are able at any point, maybe even before the 2023 season, who knows? We're still trying to get it in the works. If you want to be in a fantasy MLR league, you'll want to be following any of those social media channels. Even better, you want to be in that Discord community because that's where we're going to announce when we're expanding this thing. All right. I think we got all the housekeeping stuff out of the way. It's time to get into the big stuff, and we got to talk about the news here, Maddie. And obviously the big one that I think was released just after we released last week's episode, talking about obviously all the stuff that came out with the LA Guiltinis and the Austin Gilgronis being removed from the MLR. But there was an interesting hype video that that MLR put out on their Twitter socials, and it looks like Major League Rugby is going to Chi-Town. They're going to Chicago, and there's going to be a team in the Windy City.
Hey, I mean, look, it wasn't a hard prediction, but if you watched the last episode, I was calling it the entire episode.
You were.
But hey, I'm not going to take credit for that. It was all over social media. Everybody knew that Chicago was going to be the next one. But here's my question. I mean, other than the video, what do we know? There's a dispersal draft going on, and we don't even know who the coach is. If I'm Chicago, who's making the selections for Chicago? Who's making the picks for Chicago? Who is deciding on what players they want, what type of team they want to build with these guys in the dispersal draft? So, at that point, what do we really know about what's going on? I think that may make it difficult to possibly select Chicago players in the upcoming, fantasy Rucker fantasy league draft. Just in the fact that, we don't know what exactly their makeup is going to be, how well they're going to gel, when they're going to even get together at this point. I think these are all considerations into whether we want to pick these guys and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I mean, I will say this. I know that we said at the top of the show that this episode is all about trying to figure out what we got with the information that we have. But I think when it comes to this situation, it is very interesting when it comes to the whole thing, not even just like Chicago, not even just the LA Guiltinis and Austin Gilgronis removal, not even just the dispersal draft, but kind of everything together. There just seems to be this kind of lack of information out there with what we can play with. But hey, we're focusing on this episode on the information that we do have, and we're going to try to extrapolate things from that to see how that's going to impact fantasy MLR in 2023. So we're going to do the best that we can to draw that all out. But yeah, as of right now, Matt, outside of that hype video that MLR posted, I really haven't, at this time of this recording, I haven't really seen any more information on Chicago. It gives me a hard time predicting on what kind of players they're going to be leaning towards when it comes to this dispersal draft. But then again, at the same flip of the token, I do think that after this dispersal draft on November 11th, we are going to have a realization of 10th? Maybe the direction. Is it 10th or November 11th? It might be 10th.
I believe it's 10th.
Let me confirm here.
I believe it's 10th, but regardless, 2 or 3 days,
November 10th. November 10th.
Not going to make a big difference because, I mean, look, Chicago, I don't even think they have a Twitter page. I don't even think they have a name.
I guess my point being is that we might not know a name. We might not know the colors. We might not know exactly where they're playing. We might not know their administrative staff. We might not know their coaching staff yet. But I think following November 10th and the dispersal draft, we will have, I think, a general understanding of the direction that Chicago is going to try to go with, whether that's a development direction, whether that's trying to compete right off of the bat, whether or not they're building towards being more of a physical team, whether they're trying to be more of a skill-based team. I think we will find some of those answers when it comes to the dispersal draft on November 10th. But that being said, still a lot of gray area when it comes to information regarding this Chicago club. But hey, initial thoughts though, man. Hey, I'm excited for Chicago, dude. Chicago's a fun city. I know we're losing Austin. I know we're losing LA. Obviously, two big cities that are a lot of fun to play with. I mean, we watched the games last season, Madden, and watching those games in Austin, man, those fans were electric. I obviously was never able to get out to a match out there, but on TV, it looked like it was bumping over there in Austin. And obviously LA, you had the Coliseum and all that, and the big, lights of being in LA. But hey, I think if there's a next best option, Chicago is not too far from either of those cities. You can even say that it is a more populous city, than even Austin.
Hey, look, Chicago's a historic sports town. They'll support Chicago teams wherever there's a Chicago team. I'm sure they'll have the support wherever they are, wherever they may be playing. But, I think the one thing that maybe we haven't touched on yet, and, what is Chicago going to do with the international signings? Can we expect them to make international signings? They have room. They have a certain number of international slots. But who's going to be left by the time that these guys have set up, administrative staff on to deciding who to make the signings with, who they want to pick up? The NPC Bunnies Cup, we're already seeing a lot of those guys already being signed. If they haven't been signed, they're signing in other leagues elsewhere. It just seems like I'm not exactly sure where the international signings for them come in. And to me, it really looks like the only pathway that they can go is local talent, is signing locally, developing locally, and developing. And
obviously supplementing that with the players that they select through this draft and all those.
But that's only 16 guys. That's only, they get 16 picks, and they got to fill out the rest. They need depth. That's not even enough to fill a 23. So, at some point we're going to see, I think, they'll move towards a development route. And unfortunately, with all the international signings around the league, I don't think that that's going to hold up. I can't see it. I know I talked last episode that they'll be better than the Jackals, in a better spot than the Jackals. But at the same time, at the end of the day, international signings have been huge for other teams around the league. And that's what's really bringing some of these teams up to the next step, and really bringing these teams, like, for example, the Arrows that are making a bunch of signings, international signings like Utah and San Diego. These guys are stepping it up. And if you're not able to keep up with that, then, I don't know how well you're going to fare in the league.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, look at the champions from last year, Rugby New York, right?
Exactly.
A whole bunch of international signings on that squad, and it won them their first MLR Shield. So obviously they're playing a big part. And just to kind of tie a bow on this, to throw a wrench further into these things with regards to kind of those signings and things like that. I don't know how all those trades that were made between Austin and LA and in terms of acquiring certain players, no idea how that falls into it. Doesn't know if Chicago reaps any of those fruitions of some of those, salary cap increases or international signing spots. I have no idea. Again, kind of that point of lack of clarity, but we'll roll with the punches here, because I mean, that's what we've been doing, Maddie, for the past year.
We've been waiting for news to come out. Just patiently waiting. Myself, I haven't said a bad thing. I've been patiently just, happily waiting for more news. And I think we're just going to continue to keep doing that. I think the one thing, and while we're on the topic of this dispersal draft, I think the one big thing that comes out of everything that's coming out of USRPA, all those things of the player welfare of these guys. And I think the big thing is, who is going to opt out? Who's going to opt out of this draft? Are we going to see big names be opting out of this draft and taking the hit and not playing for half a season just so that they can choose where they want to play? And in that case, I mean, this list of these guys, we're going to need to know for the draft, because at the end of the day, I'm not going to draft a guy that is going to be playing half a season. I won't want a guy on my team that's going to only be playing half a season. Yes, they may be great pickups. We've seen the guys that come in halfway through, Waisaki Naholo, Nehe Milner-Scudder, all those guys that came halfway through still were picked up on teams, still had fantasy impact. But I don't know if we're saying that we're drafting them and holding them in our lineup knowing that they're not playing for half the season. And I think that will be the interesting thing for us.
It will be. And that's the opportunity cost, right? I mean, having, like last year, having Waisaki Naholo, having that pickup midway through the season, having Nehe Milner-Scudder midway through the season is great. But if you're picking them up and you're a team that's sitting, 2-6, you know what I mean, and not playing for a fantasy playoff spot, having Waisake Nahalo halfway through the season isn't really going to help you much. So again, to your point, I think it's very similar if any of you listeners or viewers play fantasy football or any other fantasy sports, kind of similar to the situation when you have maybe guys that are having suspensions heading into a season. You know, you talk about guys like Ezekiel Elliott and other players, you know, things like that, where they see a 4-game suspension, or Tom Brady, when they see a 4-game suspension earlier in the season. Are they good enough? Are they worth holding them and taking up a roster spot? Because these are guys you can't throw on your IR because they're not injured. Are they worth taking up a roster spot? That'll be interesting to see. And we'll get deeper into that conversation, Maddie, when we actually start looking at some of these guys that may be available, guys that could opt out, and things like that. And obviously this will be things that we'll be developing as we continue to put out shows on a weekly basis. We'll continue to update you guys. But yeah, very, very interesting stuff. Lots of dynamics when it comes to the dispersal draft, which we will get into in just a moment's time here. But a couple more things that we got to touch on before we get there. Second thing here is a whole bunch of roster moves happening over the past week, just like usual. I feel like now
it's dying down a little though. It's dying down. It is dying down. I think guys are finding their. I think teams are finding their roster. It's a little dying down, but you know, at the end of the day, Jam Delay needs something to post. So of course, the teams are still going to keep signing.
Yeah, talk about a guy that has been busy this offseason at MLR Stats, James Dealey, at James Delay on at Jam Delay on Twitter. Yeah, apparently they're just making
about him. They want to make sure everybody needs a little bit of a mental break. The teams know they got to give him a little bit of a break, you know.
Right, a little bit less signs this week, only 2 pages. But here, let's break down some of the signings here. I'm just gonna go through them. Matt, you stop me if there's anyone that that pops out to you that could be fantasy relevant in 2023. Rowita Biddle signing with Rugby Atlanta, coming over from Palmyra Premier, the Palmyra Rugby WA
Premier I'm gonna be honest, grade. I've never heard of that club.
Never heard of that either. That's all right. Ben Strange, he's going to Rugby Atlanta, coming from the Manawatu Turbos, the NPC Bunnings Cup there as well. Noel Milan going to Rugby Atlanta as well, coming from SLAR. Patty Ryan, he is coming back to the San Diego Legion after a little bit of a stint over with Rugby League 1 Division 2. Jordan Brown is moving to Rugby Atlanta. He played with Leeds Beckett University. A couple of returnees too. Cole Brown, Avery Oideman going to the Toronto Arrows.
So this is one of the ones that I want to touch on. So I don't know if any guys who maybe have been there from, you know, the start of the Arrows season in the MLR and the start of the MLR. Avery Oideman, look out for this guy. Look out for him. This guy has some, you know, some twinkle toes. He is a threat on that wing. I used to play with him when I was younger. He was a guy that we would, if we saw one-on-one matchup, we would give him the ball.
Who did he play for?
Would let him go.
Who did you play for?
I played Ontario with him.
Oh, okay.
Ontario with him. But yeah, you would give him the ball one-on-one and you would just know he would make gain line every time. He went over to Wales, got an education after having a ripper of a first season with Ontario, with the Arrows. Goes to Wales, goes get an education, comes back probably 50 pounds bigger, you know, maybe a second faster, maybe even some more steps in those boots. I would look out for him as somebody maybe you want to look at to draft.
Fantasy sleeper.
Yes.
Maybe we'll see. Yeah, again, it's all about opportunity, and hey, if he's gonna do what he was doing with the Toronto Arrows when he was first there before his international stint, he may be someone that is fantasy relevant and a guy that we will be seeing on our Fantasy Ruckers rankings moving forward. We'll see. Danny Gianniscoli, he's going to returning with the Utah Warriors. Luke Campbell, Owen Sheehy returning to the Old Glory DC. Mil Sanarivi coming back to New England Free Jacks. This is a big one. Thomas Aoki returning with the San Diego Legion. He's a guy that last year had a pretty big fantasy impact. So interesting to see him return.
I was going to point this out. I mean, San Diego Legion continuing to pack on that backline depth. I mean, I was watching some of his NPC Bunnings Cup campaign. He looked good for Auckland. And, you know, I think he's just going to add some more depth to an already lethal San Diego Legion backline. And they just added San Diego Legion, just added Patty Ryan too. So, you know.
Yeah. Exactly. Just bringing back all the boys. Carl Keane, he's going to returning with the Seattle Seawolves. Jared Adams, he's going from Northland in the NPC Bunnings Cup to NOLA Gold. And then Fred Apulu is moving from the LA Guiltinis to the San Diego Legion, playing on the Guiltinis last year, now signing with the San Diego Legion. So interesting move there. Yeah, kind of smart. Going from a team that doesn't exist anymore to a team that's making moves and looking like they may be pretty dominant here in the 2023 year. So those are our roster moves there. Last one that happened today today, or I should say more recently as we are recording this this podcast, Graydon Bowd, he is signing with Old Glory DC as well. The Canadian international is headed to the capital of the United States.
Yeah, coming from the Pacific Pride, I believe he also played for UVic. I think he's on the roster for Canada when they play Netherlands and Namibia. So yeah, good signing for Old Glory DC. I think the other one that you were going to say, Ryan, is also Isaac Salmon signing with Toronto Arrows. He was big for them. Not as much of fantasy impact, but yeah, he was big for the Arrows in terms of a guy that they constantly started.
Yeah, he featured in all 16 matches, started 12 matches for the club, obviously pivotal for that front row for the Toronto Arrows. And hey, you say not fantasy relevant now, Maddie, but I think if we include all those stats that we've been talking about,
133 tackles on the year. Yeah,
he has. First, I got to preface this by saying he's at 255 pounds. That's where he's sitting at right now, and he's moving that body. He's carrying those 255 pounds, 518 carry meters on 79 carries, 198 rucker rivals, 133 tackles, 6 defenders beaten. All right, it might just be single digits, but when it comes to a prop beating defenders, you got to throw that into the press release there. Obviously highlighting that.
And you just picture this 250 pound guy throwing in the right foot step and the goose step. Love to see it.
Yeah, and add 5 offloads there as well. A versatile prop, Isaac Salmon is, and he added a try as well in his first season with the club, so he'll enjoy his second season with the Arrows coming up in 2023. I think that's all the signings that I have to go over. So now I guess let's shift on over here, Maddie, to the big news that's going to lead us obviously directly into this discussion we're going to have about this dispersal draft. Yeah. You talked about it a little bit.
I mean, well,
before we get there, let me reveal this. The thing that we need to mention before we get into this dispersal draft, we talked about the big weekend that we had in rugby this past week. Exactly. And I don't want to miss this because this is actually pretty big. This is pretty huge. And I think it is reflective of kind of the significance, not necessarily the impact that the MLR has had, but the significance that the MLR has played and will play moving forward in the success of both, especially now, I guess in this case, United States rugby or North American rugby moving forward.
Let's not throw success out there too quick, all right?
I'm not saying that they are going to. I'm just saying that they're going to be pivotal if they are going to be successful. I think that's the better way to phrase it. So if you guys didn't know, Kenya, like we mentioned at the top of the show, faced the United States in the Rugby World Cup qualifier in Dubai this past weekend. Dominant win there by the American team. I believe the final score, I gotta pull that up here,
68 to something.
68 to 14, I want to say.
Regardless.
But the important thing here, Maddie, and you're going to touch on it here, is the number of Major League Rugby players that were slotted in this starting roster. It was incredible to see, and it was really good to see as someone that is invested in the MLR.
Look, and not just slotted in the roster, but make an impact. Christian Dyer, hat-trick. Fawcett, hat-trick. Fawcett, man of the match, right? Like, they're making an impact, but it seems like the U.S. team, I don't know if this is intentional, but to me, I'll point out a perfect example. You're starting Ryan Reese, Ryan Reese over Ruben De Haas. Ruben De Haas, if you don't know him, you may not know. If you just watch MLR, you may not know him, but Ruben De Haas has come through the development age grade. I remember playing against him, but he came through the age grade, and he plays for the Saracens now in the Premiership. And I mean, when you're looking at skill sets and you're looking at nines and you're looking at that position, it's almost a no-brainer that you want to start the guy that has the skill set to play and keep up with the guys in the Premiership, especially with the club with as much class as the Saracens. Well, class is maybe an overstatement. They're kind of cheaters, but he plays for the Saracens, right? So, I mean, come back and Ryan Reese is starting over him. You just look at it, and it has to be intentional that they are trying to start guys who are playing in the MLR, guys who are helping grow the game in North America, and guys that are, staying home and giving incentive for guys to stay home in the MLR. And maybe we see more high quality US talent continuing to make the option to stay in the MLR so that they can continue to get looked at by the US national team.
Yeah. And like I said, I mean, I think that's reflective of the understanding that I think USA Rugby has with regards to how important or how useful a tool Major League Rugby can be for them in developing their talent. And I'm looking at the starting roster now and just seeing, you know, that list of the starting 15 there and seeing, you know, the clubs that they're affiliated with, and every single one is a MLR team. It's so cool to see. It really is awesome. And again, I will say, it is against Kenya, right? It was a 68-14 walk by USA.
Look, you're part of that. You were part of that Kenyan development on your side. I know you don't like to say it, but look, you were a big part of the development of the Kenyan pathway to the national team. All right, you didn't dance around and have goat for nothing. All right,
true, fair enough. But
yeah,
I know
what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying. I mean, I guess what I'm saying to kind of wrap up this conversation is that I am encouraged. I am very, very encouraged that this was the roster that came out for a match that was very, very important. Yes, it's against Kenya, but the World Cup is on the line. You know what I mean? The World Cup is on the line, and the management of USA Rugby is confident enough to say, hey, you know, these are the MLR players that I've seen that I know can contribute on the field, and together collectively can give us the most success. That's encouraging to see. What I want to see next is when USA faces, you know, when they hopefully qualify for the Rugby World Cup and play against some of these top tier teams across the world, are they still putting out a all 15 Major League Rugby lineup? I'm not too sure. We'll get to see. And yeah, I think it's great overall, and it's a great stepping stone, I think, or a great marker and a great look for Major League Rugby, especially with all the other stuff that's been going around this offseason. I think this is a very big positive to take away from it. So yeah, very, very exciting. And like we said, very busy weekend in international rugby this past week. All right, now let's finally move on to this conversation about the USRPA, the dispersal draft, the removal of the LA Giltinis, and the removal of the Austin Gilgronis. I think we've talked about, I think, the process enough, and you can go back to other episodes regarding the situation on how we feel about it from just a rugby and just a fan perspective. But let's start to really dive into the nitty gritty, and then ultimately the impact that this will have on fantasy rugby. So the first thing I want to kind of bring up before is, because we haven't touched on it yet, is some of the statements that the USRPA has come out with. Now, I know we read the statement last week when it came to their original kind of announcement, and we'll go over that statement again because a lot of interesting tidbits when it comes to the format of this dispersal draft that will be important to where kind of guys go. But they did release another statement with regards to with the draft approaching. They say, if the MLR does decide to hold these drafts in, I guess when they release this statement, in 3 days, we would encourage them to consider the following solutions to mitigate potential player welfare concerns. A guarantee that previous housing and ancillary benefits will be honored for players picked in both drafts, a percentage of each player's salary in both drafts to be excluded from the 2023 salary caps, and then 3, the development of all future policies affecting players through the collective bargaining process. So I think, aside from what they're demanding, right, and everything, I think what this has highlighted, and what I've had time to reflect over here, Matt, for the past couple of weeks here, after the USRPA has started to get really involved with this situation, is the need for the MLR to now create, you know, a CBA. I think this league is becoming professional enough and expansive enough that there needs to be a CBA. There needs to be a players association that not only represents the United States rugby players, but just every single player that is in the MLR. And until we get to that point, we're going to continue to have these bumps and little issues and challenges here as we go along. But that being said, I do think that this is a step in the right direction. There does seem to be some sort of monologue occurring where we, through trials and tribulation, we're approaching kind of a space where you would expect a professional sports league to be in. Anything to quickly touch on that before we move on to the kind of dispersal draft stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with you, but I think it's kind of a unique situation here. Like, we're at a point in the league where some players still are working second jobs. Some players are still, you know, they have other careers outside of rugby that is reliant on where they are geographically. If they believe that they were going to be with the Giltinis or with the Gilgronis in Austin, in LA for the foreseeable future, they built careers there. They built professional careers there outside of rugby, which is exactly what you want to see guys do. And hopefully we can get to a point where the MLR players don't need to have a second job. And that would be kind of where we go from there, and they can be fully professional. But where we are now, where everything's is happening, I think it's a unique situation. The only other thing that I just want to quickly touch on before we get into more of the fantasy side of things is that I know last episode we talked about the credibility of the USRPA. It seemed that in the past week, we are quickly seeing that credibility continue to grow and grow grow.
Sure.
Because simply, not necessarily because of anything the USRPA is doing, but simply because more and more MLR players seem to be hopping on these posts, retweeting, liking, all this stuff. You guys seeing guys like Andrew Coe liking this stuff and retweeting it. And these are big names in the MLR.
Sure.
And those guys are going to make noise. And when those guys retweet it, people listen, people see it, and people follow.
And I will say, talking about players that are in the league and being involved, and obviously we just finished the conversation about the U.S. rugby team. I will say we got some kind words from former Austin Gilgroni, now San Diego Legion player Marcel Brackey, who was looking. He Rugby Morning tagged us in a tweet there where he was like, "Hey," he was shouting out some other guys, say, "When are we going to get a fantasy rugby thing going here? We need to start fantasy rugby." And I took a responsibility there through the notification through Rugby Morning to say, "Hey, we got a fantasy rugby thing going in the league that you play with. Why don't you help us out here a little bit?" And he did say that he'd be happy to be a part-time hype man. So, hey, Fantasy Ruckers hype man, Marcel Brackey, maybe?
I mean, I love it. And we need to figure out, you were saying Brackey, but I like saying his last name like Brash. So, we got to figure that out. We got to lay that down the line. I don't know if I can trust the commentators. We got to figure out the man himself, but also Rugby Morning, quick shout out. Thank you for being a wingman for the Fantasy Ruckers show.
He's been one of the OG guys. It's been great. Always helping us out, and we always do appreciate all the help that all of the outlets get in it. And it's a team game here. I think we're all in it to kind of help this thing grow. So seeing interaction with Rugby Morning, and even having players interact with us, Marcel Brackey, and obviously the players that we've had on the show in the past. It's been a fantastic ride so far. It's only helped help grow not just this show, but just fantasy rugby as a whole. Because we'd love, if it's Fantasy Ruckers or if it's not fantasy, we'd love to see fantasy rugby become a thing. I think we've said it. And all the viewers and listeners, you guys know that we're doing
also
that.
The MLR. We're helping you out. Please, come on. We're helping you out a little.
Exactly. All right. You ready to get into the nitty gritty here?
Yeah, let's get into the nitty gritty.
Let's get into the nitty gritty. All right. So if you hadn't seen it, we kind of went into more depth about this statement by the players, USA Rugby Players Association last week. So you can get into more details into our last week's episode. If you haven't seen the full statement yet, go check out the tweet on the USA Rugby Players Association Twitter page. It's at USA Rugby Players. It was released on November 4th. Very detailed statement there. What's interesting to me is that we're getting all of our dispersal draft information from a players association that is not necessarily related in any way to the MLR. And I was digging through the MLR news page. I was digging through their Twitter and socials and everything. There has yet to be any information.
That we show up on November 10th and there is nothing happening?
I don't know.
Is it possible that we have no idea? I mean, it's possible that we have no idea who is going where. We have no idea who drafts what, who drafts where. This is the potential that we could have, that we have no idea what players have opted in, what players have opted out.
Sure.
And in that case, I mean, the impact on fantasy rugby right there. I mean, what are we going to wait for? Is Jam Delay going to have to put out 3, 4, 5 pages worth of these drafted guys? Where's he getting this information? Somebody's
from Vandy with the insider knowledge.
And then Vandy's getting it from Joe Schmo on Reddit. So,
it's an ever turning circle.
Yeah. So who knows? But
But hey, let's talk about what is in this. Is that we do have some information. I am assuming that this is true, and this is coming from a statement that was sent by the MLR to players that were on the Giltinis and Gilgronis. So this is information that we're assuming has come through them and has been verified. Again, the statement is on the U.S. Rugby Players Association, who, again, we say over the past few weeks has been gaining a lot of credibility through the players that have been supporting their outspokenness about this whole situation. So I think with that in mind, I think we can take this for face value. So again, dispersal draft is happening on November 10th. The MLR teams must nominate 5 currently contracted players to be placed as expansion draft eligible. Any players can be placed into the expansion draft by their team. So there is no limitation on who can be put in there. And for any player that wants to opt out of this expansion draft, they will not be eligible to join a team until the midpoint of the 2023 season. Matt, you mentioned that earlier. And it has also been stated here, a player who has recently signed a 2023 deal with the team that they are being, I guess, exposed to in this dispersal draft, they will be designated as a alumni restricted player, and will still be eligible to be drafted by Chicago. So it doesn't matter when your contract was signed, any player is eligible, 5 players from each team, and Chicago is going to have their free pickings at these players. So it should be interesting who kind of goes where. So I think the opening, knowing that in mind, Matt, I think the opening conversation needs to be, because I don't think, obviously, we don't know who's eligible. We don't know who's going where. We don't know what Chicago is looking at. We don't even know who's making the selections for Chicago. We don't even know any kind of biases that they might have. So I think we need to take this with face value, Matt, when we have this conversation.
Yep.
When people are waiting, or when they do eventually see the results of this dispersal draft, because again, I don't think this is going to be broadcasted anywhere. I don't think you're going to get any live notifications that this player was selected. I think we're going to wake up either on November 11th or later, a few days later, and it's just going to be a
30th.
press release that's going to say, hey, these are the players that were selected. This is what's being done now. And that's what we're going to get. So with that in mind, I think what we need to approach this with, Matt, from a fantasy perspective, is just what can fantasy managers expect and extrapolate from anything that would happen from this dispersal draft. What should they look out for? Who are going to be the people that benefit from this? Who are going to be the type of players that are going to not benefit from this? What's kind of your overarching kind of reaction to what you can expect in the dispersal draft?
So just to make sure I heard you correctly, 5 players from each team nominated to be eligible for the draft.
Correct.
So, I mean, like for me, what I'm thinking is, if I was the Arrows, if I was Old Glory DC, if I was New England Free Jacks, my roster was what, 40, 45 guys deep, maybe 30 to 40 guys deep.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not touching my 23 core guys.
Sure.
Nobody is touching those 23 core guys. I will put 5 players who I believe will not be, you know, I think that the teams will be putting 5 players that maybe aren't fantasy relevant as eligible in this draft. So I think in terms of, you know, players that are moving from other teams outside of the Gilgronis or Giltinis, I think that those guys aren't going to be that much of an impact, right? I think they're going to put guys that aren't as much of a fantasy impact, guys that, you know, aren't going to be on our radar anyways to be in the draft and to be waiver wire pickups. Now, I think the more so where we got to look out for is who on the Giltinis, who on the Gilgronis is opting in and who is opting out of this draft. Sure. Because, you know, I think that's the big thing. This is where all of the players who have yet to sign with other teams are available. We've got quality guys. I think like guys like Jerry Labuskagny, right?
Yep.
You know, he's available in this draft. And he's a guy.
No, he's on Houston.
Never mind. Jerry Labuskagny. I'm getting the names mixed up. All right. But regardless, you know, there are going to be some big names.
Exactly. Here, let me name some big names for you. On the Giltinis, right? We're going down the list. We're talking about guys like Ben Lesage. We're talking about guys like Justice Sears Daru. We're talking about guys like Hanko Gramicius. These are big time guys. We're talking about Luke Carty. I mean, we didn't see DTH Vandermeer all of last season, but hey, who knows where maybe we see John Ryberg. Exactly. We're talking about Billy Meeks. Like where he, the back of the year, right? Where may he go? We don't know. Is he going to opt out? Is he going to stay in the MLR? No idea. Then we start looking at the Austin Gilgronis. You got guys like Connor Mooneyham that was a first overall pick over a couple years ago, ironically to the Dallas Jackals, and then through that whole stuff ends up on the Austin Gilgronis and now is looking for a new home. So yes, you're correct there. I think you couldn't be more right that I do think we're going to see a lot of guys from other teams, the other, I guess, 11 teams, the other 11 teams in the MLR. They're not going to expose guys that are necessarily going to be, to your point, fantasy relevant. I think where you're going to be looking is which Giltinis guys and which Gilgronis guys are going to get the best opportunity or a good opportunity to slot in there on a Chicago team, get that starting role. And hey, it may not be a good Chicago team off the bat, but we notice we've talked about this before. You know, teams like the Dallas Jackals, teams like Old Glory DC, who may have struggled a little bit last season, there are still players on those squads that you can look out for that are going to be fantasy relevant strictly on the opportunity that they're given on a weekly basis, because they're playing full 80 minutes, because they're touching the ball a lot. I think those are the types of guys that you're going to look out for, which kind of leads into my point, Maddie. You talk about guys and looking for where they're coming from, saying that LA Giltinis and Austin Gilgronis players that go to Chicago are going to have a better opportunity. Opportunity is the word that I'm talking about. I think regardless of whether you look at how good these players are that go to Chicago, Chicago is going to be selecting these players for a reason, right? They have a vision in mind on where these guys are going to slot in. And I think with that in mind, we need to look at, after we see who is actually suiting up in a Chicago jersey, which one of those guys do we see clearly has a path to have the most opportunity? And I think those are the guys that you're going to want to hedge your bets with when it comes to our fantasy draft in 2023. You're going to want to have guys that are going to be touching the ball, regardless. Maybe it isn't a Billy Meeks, maybe it isn't a Luke Carty, but maybe it's a guy, an up-and-coming guy, a young guy maybe, that a team exposed that Chicago sees some sort of prospects in and is given a shot at the starting 10 position, or is given a shot at the winger position. You don't know, because
but hey, to be fair, we saw that with the Jackals, right? We saw guys like homegrown guys getting the opportunity with the Jackals, and still nobody picked them up in the last season, right? Like, guys were not being picked up from the Jackals team. So even if we do see that, you know, I don't know if that does mean that they're going to be fantasy relevant still, simply because, you know, having those young guys does not mean that you're going to be a good team. As you know, doesn't mean Chicago is going to be a good team.
Absolutely. And I think, and it's good that you bring up Dallas. I think I dug into kind of the archives of the MLR and the history. And of course, this isn't the first dispersal draft that we've had in the MLR. We've obviously had a dispersal draft before, when the Dallas Jackals signed all those players, had the draft, and because of COVID had to opt out and delay their inaugural season. So there were players on their squad that had to be subject to a dispersal draft. I'm not too sure if we can extrapolate anything, because they're two different situations. Obviously, in this case, we have two teams that were eliminated, where in that case, it was not only it was not only a new team, one team that was eliminated. It was a brand new team that was eliminated. So they didn't have established guys that you see on the LA Giltinis and the Austin Gilgronis. That being said, I mean, I'm looking down the list, and just for kind of reference on guys who maybe opted out and stayed in, 4 people from the Dallas Jackals opted out in that dispersal draft. So if that kind of extrapolates anything on maybe the expectation on how many people will opt out, we'll see. But hey, there were good guys that came from this area, and some that were signed from free agents. You got guys like Connor Mooneyham, we mentioned, who was on the Dallas Jackals, taken back in the dispersal draft. James Malcolm, he was an international guy, was able to sign somewhere else, and obviously ended up in Seattle as a free agent, and things like that. So obviously different situations, because in this instance, there are guys that were exposed that were really, really good. And we obviously have that with the LA Giltinis and Gilgronis players. But in terms of guys that are being exposed, it was here in this case just Dallas Jackals guys and people nitpicking from them, right? It's kind of the opposite situation here. So just kind of, I thought, a similar but not so similar situation that the MLR has already experienced in its very short past, that maybe we can kind of see some sort of light in terms of what we can expect. But then again, at the same time, it's two completely different situations.
Part of this draft too is also that all the other teams also get some picks for some of these players, right? So even though Chicago gets 16 picks, I believe that the other teams get a lesser number of picks for their players. Am I right there?
I'm looking through the rules. There's no new these players against the side, which they continue playing the for unspecified team through the dispersal in the MLR for unspecified through the dispersal draft.
I'm pretty sure I saw that there, because
only take draft to play additionally. Furthermore, I haven't seen anything, but I would imagine possibly. Like, I mean that would only make it fair, right?
I mean, I saw that Chicago only gets 16 picks. So what is only 16 guys from the rest of the teams being picked,
and then everyone else gets signed. I don't know. But then again, I mean, I think just adds to the point that there is a lack of information when it comes to what's a big event that's happening in 3 days or 2 days, or when this podcast comes out in 1 day. We still don't know much about the kind of the format of this dispersal draft outside of what the statement was released by the Players Association. So
so with that not being confirmed, I won't touch on it. I thought I saw it, but I won't touch on it. I think the big thing for me, I think coming out of this is who's opting in, who's opting out, and when are we going to know about who's opting in and who's opting out? Because, I can imagine this is different than when like you said it yourself, this is different from when this happened with the Dallas Jackals, right? This is completely different because we're looking at two teams that had established players, honestly established MLR All-Stars and Superstars.
These were two teams that were on the top of the Western Conference last year. I mean, these were good teams.
Some of these guys can probably afford to not play for half the season to make sure that they're going to a situation that they want to go to. Right. So I'm thinking, and I'm going to assume that we're going to see some pretty big name guys potentially opting out of this draft so that they can, they'll take the hit on half the season and know that, hey, I can see what's going to happen halfway through the season, understand what teams are going to for a chip, who's going for that shield, right? And say, hey, can I contribute to that team? I want to sign for that team and have a choice of what situation that I want to go to. Right. And I can see that because we've seen that so much. We've seen guys from overseas jump onto teams halfway through and be able to make an impact and be able to, lead them to a chip, just like New York. I think that that's going to be a big thing because then it becomes a decision for us fantasy managers. Sure. Like we talked about earlier, are we going to draft him? Do we take that? If Billy Meeks, if guys like Connor Mooneyham decide to opt out, is that someone that we're going to decide to use a draft pick, understanding that, hey, we are missing out on a bench spot for half the season of somebody that we use a draft pick on and you probably don't want to drop. So I think that comes the big decision. And the big thing is what big names are we going to see on that opt-out list?
Yeah. So big things here to take away. Got to keep an eye out for those opt-ins, opt-outs. Hopefully that's something that is released along with the dispersal draft results. Because again, if we don't have that information come draft time, we still, and I will say, we still do have a bunch of time before our Fantasy Ruckers draft,
this is true.
Right? We still have a lot of development, right? This dispersal draft is happening November 10th. That gives them, not I guess in the grand scheme of things when you talk about, a off season, it is towards the tail end of the off season. But there is time for them to kind of sort this all out and then buy our fantasy.
Hey, remember I'm just saying, remember how long it took for them to say something about the Gilgronis and Gil teams?
This is different. This is different though. They've said something, right?
Is
now
it's
been
though?
Done.
Well,
they're gone. They're gone. The Gil teams and Gilgronis are gone.
Yeah, sure, they're gone.
The dispersal draft is happening.
Do we know that? Yes, the USRPA. Yes, we're taking at face value. But has the MLR said anything? That's not if they haven't even said anything about the draft at this point, then when are we supposed to know about when these players? If Chicago doesn't even have administrative people on their squad, when are they supposed to actually sign these players? Do they draft them and then have to sign them after that?
Sure.
Right?
Okay, well, I'll put it this way then. We're assuming this draft is happening November 10th. Sure. Okay, I'm going to give MLR the benefit of the doubt and say that this draft is happening on November 10th. Okay, sure. With that in mind, I think there's still ample amount of opportunity for fantasy managers to assess the situation and make an informed decision, hopefully, come draft time. Now, I think where the gray area lies is what you're talking about is the opt-ins and opt-outs. I do think that there is going to be an announcement with regards to, who is being selected and who goes where. I think people will have a time to assess, like what we talked about in looking out for in this dispersal draft, the opportunity, the name player that is going. Is it a marquee player? Is it a big-time player from the Gilgronis or Giltinis that's moving? Or is it a no-name player from, the Utah Warriors or the Old Glory DC that's moving that, Chicago sees a lot of potential in? Or is that an opportunity that, hey, maybe this potential player can have a lot of success in? Those are things that you're going to have to assess, and I think that you're just going to have to make those informed decisions based on that information. You may not know the opt-ins, opt-outs. We're going to get where people go where. You're going to have to kind of go with the flow with regards to these types of things. And then when it comes draft time, kind of take all that information and kind of make a decision. But you're right, Matt. I mean, it is so peculiar. It is very peculiar in a league that is, I think at a point where we can expect professional level type communication amongst the league and, you know, its fans and its players and things like that, especially if it's a league that wants to inject itself into the North American sports scene, which is a thing that is very difficult to do and very competitive to do with how many eyes are on so many different sports, especially in North America. These are types of things that you're going to have to kind of sort out here. But nonetheless, like we said, this is an episode that we're taking the information that we do have and we're applying it to that fantasy stuff. We said it. You're going to look for opportunity. You're going to look for those names when it comes to dispersal draft. And when we come back next episode, next Wednesday on November, whatever November day that is, next Wednesday, we'll have an understanding of, you know, maybe where those players are going and kind of now start to talk about not necessarily just what you're looking for, but hey, this is a player that's going to do well. This is a player that's not going to do well in terms of fantasy. And hopefully we'll have that clarification by next week with this dispersal draft. And I think once all this, I will say at the end of the day, once this clarification, all this settles out, man, I am so pumped up for this upcoming MLR season, man. With all the international signings coming in, even with the idea of having, you know, an even number of teams and having some of these guys going to some of these teams. And I will say, you know, wasn't the biggest fan of the Giltinis and the whole, you know, marketing situation, Gilgronis and all of that and the Gilchrist situation. So it's nice to see some really solid clubs with Chicago coming in. And I'm excited to see where these really big time players are going to go.
Don't speak too soon. We don't know what Chicago's team name is. It might just end up being like the Gil T Gronies. So like, you never know. You really never know.
True.
But hey, like, it's getting me excited, especially, I mean, you're the commissioner, so you don't really have to worry about the draft, but it's getting me excited thinking about all the different possibilities of how this can impact my draft strategy. I mean, even thinking about the fact that, you know, if I know that this player is opting out, does this impact how I'm drafting a player that didn't opt out? Because maybe they're going to be replaced halfway through the season by this guy. Are there going to be rumors that come out that, hey, Mooneyham, Billy Meeks, Luke Hardy, these guys are going to be signing with X club? Maybe, and maybe that impacts how I draft the current, you know, guy in that position for that club. So it's getting me excited for next season. I'm, you know, counting down the days until our draft. And I'm, you know, I've already started my research. Not actually,
you started your research. You started your research months ago.
Yeah,
exactly.
I started my research
Plus
when I figured out I was going to be last place.
Plus those sticky notes that John made sure that that you utilize moving forward too. But yeah, man, couldn't have said it better myself, dude. And I think what is going to be interesting is just, you know, seeing all that and seeing, you know, how people kind of adjust their strategies based on the things that happen or have happened over this offseason, whether that be this whole situation or some of these big time signings that have come over to the MLR. In what feels like the most international signings, at least that we've seen since being involved in the league. And yeah, it's going to be a whole lot of fun. And that's going to include a whole bunch of more content for us or for you listeners and viewers too, moving forward as well. As we get closer to the start of the 2023 MLR year, man, that means the fantasy season starting. Then that means a whole lot more fantasy content. We're going to come out with our rankings that we expect for the 2023 year. We're going to come out with some sleeper picks. We're going to come out with some boomer bust picks, maybe some bust picks, some draft steals, all of it, everything that you would expect in a fantasy show. We're going to bring that to you guys here on the Fantasy Ruckers show as we get closer to the MLR year.
What we don't know about all the politics and the operations and logistics of the MLR and whatever's going on in the league, we make up for it in fantasy rugby knowledge. And that's what we're bringing to you here.
Exactly. Absolutely. So yeah, and then sprinkle in a few interviews here and there with some of the great players that have given us their time here to talk with us and give their thoughts about fantasy rugby. It's been a whole lot of fun, and we hope to keep on bringing that for you for the weeks to come here as we close out the 2022 year and then open up the 2023 MLR season. Cannot wait, and I cannot wait to do that with all of you who are listening and watching. The support has been incredible as we first started off this project. Continues to be incredible as we continue to navigate this, and we hope to keep on growing things. So can't thank the listeners and the viewers enough for all that you do here for us at the Fantasy Ruckers. Matt, anything that you got to say here to close out the show here? Tell the people.
Yeah, look, the people got to know, and I know this is what's on everybody's mind, and I just want to make this clear because I am transparent. Unlike some organizations, I am transparent. I am officially opting out of the dispersal draft, just to let you guys know. I won't be available for half the season. I actually probably won't be available for the full 2023 season. So unfortunately, I won't be on anybody draft boards. I'm officially opting out of the dispersal.
Man, I didn't even know you were training there and getting back into it, dude.
Yeah, no, I was training to opt out. So no training at all.
There we go. All right, well, that does it here for the Fantasy Rucker Show. Again, thank you to all our listeners. Thank you to all our viewers. Make sure you give us a follow, a like, a subscription here at the Fantasy Ruckers on all our social media channels. It really does go a long way. But yeah, with that being said, Vandy will be back next week to break down the draft dispersal results. Matt, been great as always. I'm Ryan Yee. We'll be back next week, and we hope to see you then.
See you.
You've been listening to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, covering everything rugby from the MLR and beyond. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and be sure to tell all your friends. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, connect with us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers. Till next time, this is the Fantasy Ruckers Show, signing off.